Hello, so today we are going to talk about my favourite Roland SH synthesizer, the rare SH-7 from 1978. Now, I first played one of these some years ago. I thought it was great, but it wasn't mine. And in the years since, I've played most of the SH synthesizers and loads of other synthesizers, and it's led me to the conclusion that, do you know what? I think this is the coolest one. So when I happened upon a conversation online where someone was discussing that they were selling one, I swept in like a badger on a skateboard, and I now own an SH-7, so I can show you what I'm talking about. So what's the big deal about the SH-7? Well, nothing. There's no big deal about it at all. There's nothing on it that's spectacular. It's just a really nice set of features and functions that allow you to do some really cool stuff. It's very similar to the ARP Odyssey. In fact, I think Roland pretty much took that synth and made their own version of it, really. So let's start with the oscillators. You've got two juicy VCOs with the usual waveforms. And like the ARP Odyssey, you can play it duophonically. Now that's great, but there's loads of synths that have two juicy VCOs, so nothing spectacular, although unusually VCO1 is split into two parts, VCO1A and VCO1B, and VCO1A is a series of square waves at different octaves that you can mix, so you can get really nice sub-oscillators from it, or you can do mixes of it for custom wave shapes. Now, in terms of oscillator modulation, there's an LFO and sample and hold, and those are pretty run-of-the-mill. But there's also something called auto bend, which is a little discrete pitch envelope, the polarity of which you can invert, that you can use to modulate the oscillator frequency. And something really weird happens when you put the sync on this synth and use the auto bend, because for whatever reason, you really hear the harmonic series of the synced oscillator, and you get this kind of little melody as it plays like this. But where this all comes into play is when you start setting up the modulation on the oscillators, mixing the waveforms, and then running them into the ring modulator. Now, another little thing is that there's this audio mixer here which is pre-filter, and unlike most Rolands, it overdrives, so you can get some nice saturation and distortion, especially when you're running external signals through it. Okay, so we've talked about the oscillators, the overdriving filter mixer, the ring modulator, there's a noise generator as well. Let's get over to the filter section. Now, in the 70s, Roland revised their filter designs all the time. It wasn't until the 80s that they started standardizing things. And if you want a breakdown of all those filters, I thoroughly recommend Florian and Wanda's amazing website, which I've linked in the description. Now, the SH-7 and its little brother, the SH-1, both use a 24 dB or 4-pole resonant low-pass filter that uses CA3080 OTAs with FET transistors as buffers. I don't know what I just said, but for a second there you thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. I don't, I can just read. So the only other filter that Roland made that resembles that is one of the two filter designs you find in the mighty System 700. So there's a bit of System 700 about this synth. The next thing to talk about is the filter modulation, which is really generous. It's way more comprehensive than any of the other Roland SH synthesizers, I think. It's basically taking ideas from the ARP Odyssey and then expanding upon it. So the first thing that I really like is that you can do modulation of the filter cutoff from VCO2 for all sorts of audio rate shenanigans. Another thing, you can modulate the filter cutoff with noise for those kind of fragile, broken kind of sounds. There's a pedal input which you can hack and use for external CVs. There's LFO, sample and hold. There's also an envelope follower, which is derived from the external signal input, which you've seen me using in the demos. And then there's these really great envelopes. They're really nice and snappy, which for me, who makes a lot of kind of springy boingy music, is really important. So, the SH-7 is rare, and I think that's for two different reasons. Firstly, because Roland didn't make many of anything, relatively speaking, in the 70s, because everything was handmade, it was the early days, but also because of the year it came out, 1978, the same year that the Prophet 5 came out, and Roland's own Jupiter 4. Following year, you get the OBX, etc. So polysynths were here, the world had changed. Plus, Roland brought out the SH-1, which is the little baby brother of this, which I've discussed, and the SH-2, and the SH-09, and the ProMars, and a couple of those were a fraction of the price of this. So if you were a beginner or you were on a budget, you would get SH-1, SH-2, etc. And if you were a professional musician or had a bigger budget, you'd get a polysynth. So this was neither affordable nor was it polyphonic, so it was a hard sell, I'd guess, and sure enough it appears in the brochure in 1978, it appears in the brochure in 1979, 1980, it's gone, never to be seen again. So I think they only made it for about 18 months, and they probably only made, I don't know, a couple of thousand or something like that, which is why you just don't see them very often. In terms of users, originally it was used by Chris Carter, In Excess, and the Human League, and that seems to be about it. And then, like so many bits of vintage gear, it had a bit of a second life some years later. It was used by Aphex Twin on the AFX stuff, MGMT, Venetian Snares, John T. Harder, and a few others, but really it's quite a niche thing. If you want the music from this video, the stems of the music from this video, and any sample packs I make, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching and indulging me in my favourite Roland SH synthesizer.